Welcome to The Jewish Lens, a podcast to discuss anything and everything from a Jewish perspective. Now, please help me welcome the man who controls the media, your host, Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of The Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen, and today I am thrilled to welcome someone who's been a journalist for over 20 years. She's been a director of a place that I love, the Harold Grinspoon Foundation. She's launched and directed two different reading readiness programs in Israel, one in Hebrew and one in Arabic. And she's also the author of the great new novel, Hill of Secrets. Please help me welcome Galina Vromen. Galina, thanks so much for joining me.
Hi, a pleasure to be with you.
We have a lot to cover, but let's start by going back with you. So where did you grow up?
Oh, that's probably the most complicated questions you could ask me. I was actually born in Israel. I was raised in New Jersey and upstate New York.
When did you move to Jersey? How old were you?
I was, we lived first in New York City. I moved to New Jersey when I was 7.
Oh, where in New York?
Where in New Jersey or where in New York? New York?
Oh, both. Where in New York did you live? I know you can't tell from the accent. I'm a New Yorker.
We were in the near the cloisters we started.
Okay.
And then in New Jersey, in Plainfield, New Jersey, and then in Poughkeepsie, New York. All of which the Plainfield and the Poughkeepsie part helped make me a Zionist. I was really
I don't think I grew up in a very Zionistic family, so it's that's been ingrained in me from the time I was a kid. So what was your life like growing up, and especially, I guess, in regard to Judaism? Like, were you guys observant and everything?
I came from a very, my parents were European refugees. They got out of Europe during the war. My mother ended up in the Congo. My father ended up in Palestine.
Oh, wow.
And, I was born, obviously, after the war. And they met, they married in Israel, and they moved to the United States when I was very young. So I basically grew up with, I would say, Jewish culture. And very much my parents both spoke Hebrew, not to each other necessarily. They spoke whatever language of wherever they were. So when they lived in Israel, they spoke in Hebrew. When they moved to America, they spoke in English to each other. So I grew up in this kind of hodgepodge of different languages. So
Same with me. Yeah.
I was very culturally Jewish, but we were not religious.
Did they discuss their experiences with you about what happened?
Yeah, they did. I mean, they both left Europe after Hitler took over. They both got out in time. So they did not go through camps or anything like that, but they had yes, it was definitely kind of part of the household was having that sense of being refugees, of being immigrants, but it wasn't something that was kept from me or hidden or anything like that.
Yeah, no, it's because I've spoken to other people who they were that their parents like never discussed it, and so it's just curious with you.
No, my mother was in the Belgian Congo, so it wasn't let me put it this one, it wasn't as traumatic as some of the experiences that other people went through. In other words, they didn't suffer the kind of deprivation. It was the experience of fleeing, and it was the experience of being refugees and all that, but it wasn't the kind of trauma that people were reluctant to talk about.
So was your family like very supportive of like the arts? So you're a writer, you've been a writer for a long time. Is your family supportive of like the arts in general?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't. This is my, this is a very late entry into fiction writing.
Right.
So but I think my parents were always pretty clear that it was important to do what mattered to you. And so I very, very early on thought I wanted to be a journalist. So I did.
Did you? How old were you when you first started getting that feeling?
Oh, I think I was like a preteen. I was gonna be a National Geographic reporter and marry a photographer, and we were gonna travel the world as a writing and photographing team. I think that was kind of my dream from the time I was 10 years old. So, and then when I was about, when I was in college, I told people I was going to be the Jerusalem correspondent for the New York Times. So I didn't quite make it as a Jerusalem correspondent of the New York Times, but I was the Jerusalem correspondent of Reuters, which was pretty good.
Did you involve like in school papers and stuff when you were like in high school or anything, or nothing like that?
Not in high school, but in college a little bit. And And I took an internship. I did an internship in college in Mexico City, working for an English language newspaper in Mexico City for a
Oh, wow.
while. I graduated from college, and as soon as I sort of got the money, I worked in publishing for a while, and then as soon as I got the money, I moved to Paris and worked for the Herald Tribune. Um,
I'm
and
going to discuss all
so
that. Yeah.
I was very focused. I did media studies at Hampshire College. Ken Burns was the cameraman.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's
And
fantastic.
he was, he was this quiet guy then. I mean, nobody knew he was destined for the fame that he. But so I was very focused on being a journalist from pretty
Well,
early.
you wanted to be a journalist, but when did you realize that you had a talent for it also?
Oh, I don't think it's talent. I really don't. I think you have to. Working as a journalist, basically what motivated me was there were two things. One was I really loved asking questions. I couldn't
Hmm.
believe somebody would pay you to ask questions. And secondly, I didn't like to get up early in the morning, and journalism allowed you to work from the afternoon until late at night, and that suited me much better. So, for example, when I worked at the news in Mexico City, my shift started at 1 in the afternoon, which suited me just fine. And when I worked in the Herald Tribune in Paris, it was pretty much the same. So if you work for a morning newspaper, you start working in the afternoon, and I loved
Hmm.
that. So that was kind of those were so between getting paid to ask questions and meet interesting people and having a schedule that I really liked, then the writing is something that you drum into yourself. I mean, you know, it's just you learn how to do it.
Yeah,
It
I
becomes
do agree with you. I mean, I think you can definitely learn writing, but I think some people already have like a more, I guess, innate sense of, of the craft more than others to start with a little bit. That's, I
yeah. I
guess,
mean,
just my opinion.
I wrote I wrote poetry to my grandfather when I was little and stuff. So I always had a thing
Was that
about
the
writing.
first thing that
I
you
think
wrote was
that's the
poetry?
truth. Yeah, yeah. I had a correspondence with I sent him a poem. He sent me a poem back. I sent him one back.
Oh, that's
Um,
nice.
he was very sweet. It was really very sweet of him. And then really, I think it's training. I think it really is
I agree
training.
with you on that.
And
Yes.
for the first 6 months that I worked for the Associated Press, nothing I wrote got sent out on the wire. And then I remember the first time an editor let it through, and I was, yes, yes. Um,
What was that story?
I don't even remember. Oh, I do. Actually, I do. Actually, it was a feature on ancient toys at the Israel Museum. It was
Sounds like
an
something I would like
ancient
to.
toys at the Israel Museum. And he didn't touch that feature, and it was like, oh my God, he let it go.
Did you
Um, So yeah, you learn to it's drummed into you. If you it's really is, I think writing really is a practice makes perfect. And of course there are people that are more talented than others, but it's 10% talent and 90% persistence.
Yeah, I would, yeah, definitely persistence. I've heard many editors say that at conferences about, the ones that make it are the ones who don't give up, which is obvious in itself, but it's very true. So, I'm just curious now, you got into fiction so much later. Do you have any like favorite books when you were growing up, like, as a child?
Nothing you wouldn't think of Dr. Seuss. I mean,
So you did work as a journalist for many years. So you worked for Reuters, you said, like, and
Mhm.
you've lived in so many different countries. I saw Israel, Mexico, the Netherlands, which is unfortunately in the news right now, and France. So, I thought I lived in a lot of places, and we share a couple of those locations, but I've lived nowhere near as many as you. So how did you first become involved with Reuters?
I was living in Israel. I had been working for AP for a while, and Reuters offered a more lucrative, better conditions, and so I moved to them. I was hired as what's known as a local hire, so it was basically, and then they promoted me to international staff, and then and the way it works is you get hired in one place, and when they promote you to international staff, you have to move.
Awesome.
And so I moved to The Hague
Oh,
and
wow.
covered Holland for 4 years, and then was moved to the equities desk in London for a while. And so I had they were wonderful to me. It was
You
a
were
really,
in you were in Israel first? You were in Israel as a
I
journalist
was
first?
hired in Israel as a journalist in 19, I was in Israel in 1980. I worked for AP for a while, and then in 1982, I started during the first, what was now called the First Lebanon War. I was hired by Reuters, and I was
But
actually one of the, if not the first, one of the first female correspondents,
Oh, wow.
national correspondents to go into Lebanon to cover things from the Israeli side.
Did you move to Israel for journalism? You just decided to move on your own. I was like,
No,
what prompted you
I
to move
was
to
a
Israel?
Zionist. I was a Zionist.
What prompted you to move at that time? Just that?
I moved. I had done a gap year in Israel with the youth leadership Mechod Madrichei Chutz La'aretz, which is a youth leadership design organization. It was basically it's a 1 year program that's run by the Jewish Agency, and
Hmm.
so I did that for a year. And I had promised my mother I would come back to America after a while because she was pretty sure I'd fall in love with Israel, and she was damn right.
I had that same worry with my kids. Yes.
And so I came back to the United States, finished college, and then basically was oriented on, getting myself back to Israel sooner or later via Europe. Because at the time, there was 100% travel tax on
Oh my
Israel.
God.
And since I was a born Israeli, that applied to me. And so I figured I better go see Europe before I move to Israel because I'll never have the money to travel again. And so I did that. And then I ended up in Israel in 1980.
I Both my daughters, like I said, did that. My youngest is there now for a gap year studying. So you remember some of the stories that you were assigned to during that time?
When I was what do you mean when I was when I
In
lived
Reuters, some of the things that you had to cover
in
with.
Reuters? Well, I did I covered a lot about the Ethiopian
Mm.
immigration to Israel. There was a lot of stuff going on in the West Bank. We
Yeah.
were around the West Bank quite a lot. The Demjanjuk trial
Oh, wow.
and the Lebanon War. And also, I ended up when I was in Holland. I also did a stint. I went back to during the Gulf War. I was there as well.
You've lived in so many different countries. I mean, do you have a favorite among them?
Um, I, you know, Israel is very, very dear to my heart. I don't think the Israel of today is the Israel of that it that was dear to my heart in the 1980s. It's a very
Very
different,
different. Very different. Yeah.
but it's always been very close to my heart.
Yeah.
I enjoyed living in Holland very much. I have a deep appreciation for the Dutch and their philosophy of life. And they I think those are the two places that I if they could do something about the weather, I would love them much more.
Well, let me ask you because you have a different perspective looking living in all these different places. Was it tougher than others as a Jew living in some of these places?
No, I really
No.
can't say that no, I don't think that was an issue. Um, no, I think it has much more to do with the acceptance of the dominant culture than anything else. What is a dominant culture like? And the British are very different from the French. The French are very
Hmm.
different from the Mexicans, and the Mexicans are very different from the Dutch. So I think that it has much more to do with the dominant culture than the Jewish aspect of it to me.
Well, let me ask you. Want to ask you specifically about Mexico. I'm half Mexican. I lived there for a couple of years when I was a kid. So, what are some of your memories of living there?
I had a blast. I mean, I lived in Mexico City. I spent the mornings I would go off to the university and study anthropology. Then I'd show up at the newspaper.
Oh, you did.
I got all these free tickets. I got all the free tickets that nobody knew what to do with, and went off to see performances in the evening, hung out with friends and all kinds of places until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. I lived in a boarding house with a lot of other young people, and we just had a blast. It
How
was
how long
very
were you there?
I was there 6 months,
Okay,
um,
not that.
and it was lovely. And I traveled around, went to the south, and um, it was a really fun time. I had a great time there.
Now, so I'm curious. So you were doing journalism for many years. So you eventually stopped working at Reuters and other places, and you started working for the Harold Grinspoon Foundation. I have nothing but good things to say about them. So how did that come about that you go from that to Harold Grinspoon?
Well, basically in 2002, which was the height of the Intifada, I'm married to an Israeli who doesn't want to live in Israel. So, uh, so in 2002, he pretty much said, "I'm out of here." And so we moved back to the U.S. and I moved back to, I said, look, the only place I've really enjoyed living in the United States was in Amherst, Massachusetts, where I went to college. So we focused on sort of moving to that area. And I had a couple of walks with Harold, which was how he hired people at the time. You walked with him.
How did you meet him to begin with?
Through a friend who had
Okay.
known of him, and I called him, and he said, "Let's go for a walk." And the first walk didn't go particularly well. Um, and h- and then we had a second walk, and then we had a third walk, and by then I was hired. His wife liked me. That helped. She sort of said, "You need to talk to this woman again," and he hired me with a kind of as director of special projects, so that wasn't very well defined. He was at the time thinking about what he wanted to do in Israel. He was very concerned about press coverage of Israel in the American press.
Mhm.
So my background in media interested him, my knowledge of Israel interested him. And so we basically carved out a strategy together about what the foundation would do in Israel, what made sense. And at the time, Grinspoon Foundation was also transitioning from basically a local foundation to a national foundation, because he started out very local, helping his federation, being very much a local philanthropist. And this is really a time when he was starting to have to put in more and more money in the Jewish community
Mhm.
and thinking about more national kinds of stuff. And so the result was that we sort of decided to focus on the area of Afula and the Gilboa, which was where the Federation of Western Massachusetts was focusing. And then we decided on certain areas, and so I became involved in the whole grant making and
Oh, wow.
process with him. And then in 2008, when my son graduated high school, I told him, listen, I want to go back to Israel. And he said, well, okay, look, we're not investing enough in Israel for that to be a full-time job for you. I had helped him start also anything that didn't have a
You were behind.
right. So in other words, before PJ Library became PJ Library, I was kind of on the initial team for that before he hired somebody for that project.
Mhm.
And so in 2008, I went back to Israel, and he said, "Look, I can promise you a job for 6 months, but after that, I don't think I need you full time to look after my money. Maybe part time, but start looking for other things."
Uh-huh.
And then the stock market crashed.
Yeah, remember
And he
that.
completely and he decided to completely reorient his money. And the result was that he said to me, I want to pull out of my grant making in Israel, other than PJ Library is going to be my thing. That's when PJ Library started in 2005, but in 2008, he really decided this is where he's going to focus everything. And and so he said, so what I want you to do is concentrate on seeing whether you can start PJ Library in Israel, an Israeli version of it. So
So,
we stopped grant making in other areas, and that became my focus.
you were really there, I mean, at the beginning stages of PJ Library. I mean, PJ Library, like I said,
I joined the foundation in 2002, and PJ Library started in 2005. Before that, Harold was involved in supporting Jewish day schools with scholarships
Mhm.
and general support in his area. He was very interested in Jewish camping already, which became a greater concern over time. And he was interested in and B'nai Tzedek, which was a program for philanthropy for B'nai Bar Mitzvah children, getting them involved in philanthropy from an early age. That was where he was focused then. And then the whole idea, basically, he was a contributor to the Dolly Parton Imagination Library in Springfield as part of his non-Jewish giving, which was a book program for inner city kids. And he basically said, why don't we have something like this for Jews? And that became the kernel of his thinking about PJ Library. He said,
Right.
Jewish families have books, but they don't have Jewish books for children in their homes. We should be providing, and that
Well, yeah,
combined.
that. Can you briefly like explain for those who don't know what PJ Library is? Can you briefly explain what they do?
Yeah, PJ Library is basically a program where children receive books at home, that are related to Jewish subjects. The idea being to encourage children and parents to read about Jewish things in the home, and it's as appropriate for affiliated Jews as for unaffiliated Jews. And so this Dolly Parton Imagination Library, which sent books to inner city kids who didn't have books, was the original kind of kernel of an idea. And then it was combined with his having read an article that said that families decide the religious identity of their family when their first child is between the ages of 0 and 5. Kid is born, you decide, are you going to join a community? What preschool are you going to send your kid to? And he said, we have to reach families then. And so those two ideas combined, and that is how PJ Library was really born. He said, we have to reach those families, whether they're affiliated or not, and let's reach them with books. And
yeah, they're just fantastic. Yeah, I found Harold Grinspoon to be very gracious. The PJ, like I said, PJ Library has been very good to me. I think it's a wonderful program. So when you were there, you launched 2 different programs there, right?
Well, I started with him, so I was kind of at the sort of the team that put together PJ Library at the very beginning with him and thought through the idea, and then they hired a CEO. What I did in 2008 when I moved to Israel was to think about how to adapt it to Israel.
Right. Okay.
Now, if you think that a lot of the PJ Library books are focused on holidays, on Jewish holidays, that becomes kind of irrelevant in Israel. If you're going to do a Jewish book program in Israel, you don't really need to focus on Rosh Hashanah. Everybody's, on vacation. So I had to help him think about how do we make this up. The other thing is that PJ Library programs come to your mailbox, right? Have you ever seen an Israeli mailbox? It's not like an American mailbox. You can't just mail a book home. You get a little notice in your mailbox to go to the post office to stand in line to get the book. I said, Harold, it's not going to work. People are not going to stand in line on their one day, on the Friday morning when they're not working, and stand in line for a book they didn't ask for. Don't think it's happening. So it took us a while to sort of think this through, and basically the idea was that that it would make a lot more sense to work with the education ministry, because unlike in America, in Israel, you can reach almost every Jewish kid you want to reach through the education ministry. So that is really what we did. We partnered with the education ministry, and the model became different. It became a school-based model because basically public education in Israel begins at the age of 3. Now it started at 4, but it was 3 to 4. So you basically have 3 years of preschool that your kid is in public school. So we started the program then. And so kids were getting the books through you would deliver like 30, 35 books to a classroom. The teacher introduces the book and the teacher sends the book home. And so it became a very different program. And what I think I was naive about it, because I don't come from the area of education, for me, it was like the technical logistics of the post box wasn't going to work. But the truth of the matter is that the leverage of having the teacher involved is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Because the teacher reads the book to the kid. The kid knows the book by the time they come home. They come in, they're all excited. Everybody's all excited. The kid has brought something. Instead of the aunt or the grandmother buying the book, the kid brings the book home, right? And the kid already is the expert. It's a one case where they read a book, and if mom says, well, what happens next? The kid already knows. Okay, the kid may even be able to, more or less, depending on what the teacher has done in class, be able to recite what happened in the book. So they're like all excited. And one parent told me is, I have one of those kids when you ask them what happened in school, nothing.
Yes.
When the PJ Library book comes home, when the Sifriat Pijama, it's called Sifriat Pijama in Hebrew, all of a sudden the kid is telling me what they did with what book-related activities they did in the classroom. And suddenly I'm finding out a little bit about what the kid does during the day. So it was very interesting. And we eventually ended up then also starting a parallel program in Arabic, which obviously wasn't about Jewish values, but we still wanted to focus on important discussions in the family. So it was about universal values. So if you look at honoring thy parents, it's a perfectly good universal value. So whether you can use the same book really for both
Yes.
populations. Bikur Cholim, caring for the sick, honoring honoring guests, all this kind of stuff. These are perfectly universal values that also
Right.
have to be Jewish ones. And so we worked on those. And then there were also specific ones. In other words, we had things that were very specifically Jewish folklore and so forth. And those books were not in the Arabic program. So it was kind of the Arabic program made their own decisions. The Hebrew program made their own decisions. There was overlap over the books that were used. And some of the books were the same and some of the books were different.
You had to get approval from like different communities, I guess, before a book went out.
We needed the approval of the Ministry of Education, and we were really, I have to say, it was quite a dance, but we really tried to find common ground. For example, when I came to Israel in 2008, there really was no good book for young children about the whole folk tale about the rabbi who the guy whose house is crowded, and he goes to the rabbi, and the rabbi says, put your goats in and put your cows in and put your chickens in. And then when he takes it out, all of a sudden the house is very roomy. Well, that's a perfectly good book for kids, but it didn't exist in Hebrew.
Okay.
And so we would talk to publishers and to book editors and publishing houses and say to them, this is a perfectly good story for children. Can you find somebody who will write a good version of it? And sure enough, we got like 8 versions, and we ended up with a really, really nice one by Ephraim Sidon, which continues to sell to this day.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
So there were other things. There's also the Jewish tradition of licking a page of the Torah, sort of to start when a child starts, or having a cookie in the shape of the Hebrew letters when children begin to learn Hebrew, which was something that was done in the shtetl. It was also done among Oriental Jews. And so we said, well, that's a nice book for, when kids are starting to learn Hebrew. Like, why can't we have a kid's book about that? And indeed, there now is. So we really tried to find areas of commonality of books that would suit secular Jews, as well as both for the secular school system and the religious school system. And I do think that even today, Sifriyat Pijama is the only program that has Jewish content that is similar for both school systems in Israel, both the secular school system and the religious school system.
I can't tell you how impressed I am that you helped start this whole program. So it's so what you left there? What made you leave finally?
Unfortunately, the Haredi community, the ultra-Orthodox community, does not get the books. They approached us at one point, and we said, look, we're not going to create separate books for you because our whole point is to create commonality. But you can take all the books that we've distributed over the years, and at that point there were like more than 150. And I said, if you can find 8 books a year for 3 years that you agree on within the Haredi community, we will distribute those books and not books that aren't suitable for you. But they have to be within the context. And then then it goes like this. There are Haredi communities that will not accept a book that's not written by a Jew. There are Haredi communities that don't care if it's a non-Jew, but if it's a Jew, it has to be an ultra-Orthodox Jew. There's different levels of the Chabad in Israel will not allow books with non-kosher animals, which including, did you know that a bee was not kosher? I had no idea.
I was not aware of that.
So by the time they whittled down from 150 books, they could not come up with 24 books that they agreed on. So they're not the program.
I'm amazed that you have to think that you have to start doing, cater to like this one, all these different communities with different books. I didn't even think about that, but yeah, I guess so. But so
it was very complicated, but they recognized the value of the books, they recognized the quality of the books, and they wanted them, but they just couldn't agree on
couldn't adapt it. So why did you leave PJ Library? What made you wind up leaving?
I had been leading these 2 programs for 12 years. I was working very hard, and I was getting to retirement age, and it was getting a little bit of same old for me. And I basically wanted to leave in 2019, and then And a week after I told Harold that I would like to leave, they closed all the schools because of COVID. And I
Wow.
called him and I said, you know what? I'm not leaving. This is not a good time to leave a program. This is not a good time to bring in
Right.
somebody new. I'm not going to get to do any of the things I wanted to do in my retirement anyway. So I stayed for another year and a half, and it turned out for another year, I think, it turned out to be the most fascinating time because we had to completely redirect everything we were doing. We couldn't deliver the books to the schools. The kids weren't in school. We became, much more based on reaching the kids at home through social media. David Grossman was wonderful. He gave us a text of a book of his that wasn't yet illustrated, and he read it to children, and we invited them to illustrate the book.
Oh,
And
that's fantastic.
it was fantastic, and we got a lot of cooperation from a lot of really wonderful writers. And that helped us provide content for parents at home around books. We created a Passover game. We created a Yom Ha'atzmaut game. We created, because also that was another thing was all of a sudden families were doing the holidays
Activities, right?
in a nuclear family, which for
Right.
many families they'd never run a Seder before. So we created a Passover game that they could play with their kids, and in addition to reading the Haggadah. So there were a lot of things we did.
Speaking of PJ, I've interviewed Catriella already, who I adore.
Right.
She's
Good
fantastic.
colleague.
Yes. So before we get to your book, I wanted to go. We'll get to that in a second. I was very fascinated with this. You've had some of your work performed by NPR. So how did how did that happen, first of all, and what was it like for you to hear your work being performed on that program?
Um, well, it happened because I submitted the story to an anthology
Okay.
that was called With Signs and Wonders. And then Isaiah Sheffer, who was then at the head of Selected Shorts, the late wonderful Isaiah Sheffer, was asked by Washington D.C. to put together a program, and he put together a program and included my story from that anthology, and then went on to recommend it for Selected Shorts. And it was read, and Isaiah Sheffer himself read the story. It's Sarah's story. It's basically Akedat Yitzchak from the point of view of Sarah, who Abraham comes home and he says, "Listen, Sarah, God's asked me to sacrifice our son." And and then what she goes through as she tries to wrap her mind around that one and what she does about it. So Isaiah Sheffer himself actually read the story at a JOFA concert, at the Jewish Orthodox Women's Conference himself. And it was a fantastic reading. He was such a good, and I came to that, and it was just so wonderful to hear him read it. And then the story was recorded by Jane Curtin for Selected Shorts. But the job that he did on it was totally memorable for me. And so that's how it became part of the Selected Shorts. It was then put on a CD and so forth. So that was really great.
How was it when you got to hear it finally? I mean, how did you feel with that?
Yeah, no, I heard it. I mean, I heard the Jane Curtin, and that was fine. But to hear Isaiah Sheffer do it was even more of a treat. I have to be honest.
Well, let's talk about your book, Hell of Secrets. So, could you just tell it looked fascinating to me? Can you just tell a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, this is the book, Hill of Secrets. It came out in October. I'm very pleased to say that it's already gotten close to 5,000 ratings
I saw that it's got some
Amazon.
fantastic reviews. Yes.
And I'm really pleased with how it's doing. Hill of Secrets takes place in Los Alamos, New Mexico, during World War II. I've always been interested in the issue of nuclear weapons, as one might be if one has an interest in the Middle East. So that is the basic background, but it really, for those who have seen the Oppenheimer movie, it's kind of a complement to it because it really covers what the Oppenheimer movie doesn't, which is the domestic side of life. There are 6,000 people who lived in Los Alamos by 1945, by the time the bomb was launched against Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Mm.
And there were 6,000 people living there. 2/3 of them were families. And the scientists came with their families, and basically I was interested in looking at what it was like for the women and children. So the book follows 5 characters with different chapters, each one with rotating chapters, and what life was like on a daily. They were living in an army base. They didn't know how long they were there. They didn't know why they were there. The whole book really deals with the issue of secrecy, because the big secret, the enormous secret, was the bomb itself, which nobody could talk about. But in addition, I was very much inspired by, what I've sort of gleaned of kibbutz life, where everybody knows everybody's business and lots of stuff is going on. Because if you think about this community of 6,000, they're stuck in New Mexico in this mesa. They could go down to Santa Fe for shopping, but basically they couldn't go on vacation. They were stuck there, and they didn't know for how long. And what happens under those kinds of circumstances? So it really is there's romance and there's lots of stuff going on in the novel, and so it all takes place in that context.
Was there one? I mean, you mentioned like being interested in that subject. I mean, the one in the movie itself. So was there one thing that just inspired you that I want to write about this? What was the one?
Well, I've always been very intrigued by the whole issue of secrecy.
Mhm.
And privacy, and what you tell and what you don't tell, and why you tell it and why you don't tell it. And I think that has a little bit to do with my parents' European background, and I think also a trajectory of age. It's a combination for those of us who grew up in the 60s. Life was much more private. There was the big C. You didn't say the word cancer. Gay people were not out. There was a lot. You did not hang out your laundry in public, and that was, if you were European, even less so. And things have changed so much now that it's like everything is out there, right? You do, and I guess part of me is not so sure that that's better. I think it is for some people. I think there's some parts of it are. I think certainly people who don't have to hide their sexual identity, that's a good thing. But sometimes it's like too much information, and I'm not sure that it really helps people.
Well, I always laugh at that. No, you're 100% right. They always laugh at, yeah, when I was younger, everything, you don't talk about this stuff. And now I'm going to post this on social media for thousands of people I don't know to see as well.
So I really try to raise the issue of, what do you keep secret? What don't you keep secret? Who do you keep it secret from? Why do you keep it secret? Is it self-serving? Is it actually merciful? And I sort of want people to grapple with those questions when they read the novel. And that's also on a national level. I mean, basically, for me, the contrast between the fact that these atomic bombs that changed the course of history in such profound ways were done in secret without any public discussion whatsoever. And if you compare it with the whole issue of nuclear energy, that on a civic scale, which was the heated debate for years and years and years, not in my backyard, yes, no, maybe, some, not. There's such a contrast between those two, and what was done to Hiroshima and Nagasaki was done in our names as Americans, and something over which we had absolutely no say. And I think at a time when we are probably closer to the use of nuclear weapons than at any other time I can think of since the Cuban Missile Crisis, it's something that we need to sort of grapple with. What was done in our name in the past, what might be done, what's going on in the world with these things, and how do we sort of try to minimize the human cost of these incredibly destructive weapons.
Yeah, it was still controversial, all these things. Yeah, that's a whole other show. But yes. But so what do you, I mean, like the book looks fantastic. Like we said, it's got tons of reviews. I looked it up over there. Everything positive. So what are you working on next?
Well, I think I'm been mulling it over in my mind, but I think I will probably do a sequel with one of the characters.
Oh, are you? Oh,
Yeah.
fantastic. Have you
probably.
started or no?
I haven't started. I've been trying to figure out what the plot is.
Oh,
So, like what's going to happen and to who and that kind of stuff. I sort of I need it's a process. I haven't started writing it, but I expect to.
I hope so. I hope we'll come back and we'll discuss that one when it comes out. So how can people follow you on social media?
Well, I have a website. I'm on Facebook, and I'm on the book is on Instagram. I'm not directly on Instagram, but if you look up the book title,
The
he'll
book
see.
is it's that. I'll post
Um,
I'll post all the links to that.
and that's basically where it can be found. But I do hope, I think that the book is really a good book for book clubs, because it does raise a lot of issues, both about
Hmm.
secrecy in our lives, secrecy as in national issues, um, and the 80th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is coming up next August, which I think is also a time to pause and think about these matters. Um, and that's I love talking about it, as you can tell.
Well, I want to thank you again for coming on. It's a pleasure speaking to you. The book is Hill of Secrets. Fantastic reviews. Everyone should go out and get it. Yes, hold it up. But there we go. And definitely go get it. And again, this has been The Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen. And again, a very special thanks to Galina Vromen. And please like, comment, and subscribe.
Thanks for tuning in to The Jewish Lens, where all items used was strictly kosher.